Welcome to the 28mm build. My name is Jeff Perryman. It's been less than 24 hours after my first post and my first video, which was an introduction of myself, and I've had so many kind words. So many words of encouragement. No pressure. Everyone is hoping that this will be a wonderful new channel with lots of new stuff. And I hope not to disappoint you. Thank you for your subscriptions and thank you for those kind words. I've even been told that I have a Taoist point of view when it comes to life and crafting. In fact, I was called the Tao of Crafting, and that is quite a title to live up to. Thank you very much. I'm going to cover tools and types of materials that I work with for building my buildings in this video. Now, I've done this before I've started the channel, and I've made short videos and posted them both in Dungeons and Glue Sticks as well as the Tabletop Crafters Guild. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to try to cover it in a little more detail, talk about a few more things. And with that in mind, let's get started. So this is the barn that I started building last year. I was inspired by a young man who was working with popsicle sticks and a hot glue gun. What he did is he used real-world methods to frame his structures, and he built a popsicle mansion. In fact, here in YouTube, if you will search for popsicle mansions, you will see some of his amazing work. So I had to immediately run out and buy some popsicle sticks and start building this. And I built this with Warhammer in mind. I'm a Warhammer player, fantasy battle, as well as a Dungeons & Dragons player. So I wanted something that I could use my miniatures for both games. And with that, I built what I assumed at the time was a realistically scaled warehouse/barn. And I designed it in such a way that I can remove the roofs and get into the different areas of the barn to play with my miniatures. I even went so far as to build it in a way that if I thought that even if the barn itself got in the way, I could remove it from its foundation, leaving it there so that I can bring in my miniatures, set up the interior any way I wanted for the story, and play around in here. That's funny. That is funny. That is really funny. So the barn was a learning experience for me, but the problem was that it was woefully out of scale. Popsicle sticks are huge, and so here's where I want to talk a little bit about the scale that I'm going to be using for all of these builds throughout all of my videos, unless otherwise stated. I have a few miniatures to paint, by the way. What I'm working with is 28mm scale. And what that means is that 28mm, 25mm, whatever millimeter you're using, it's assumed that a 6-foot man is going to be 28mm tall. I fudge a little bit, as you will find yourself fudging a little bit. If you pick up, let's say, a Games Workshop miniature and you measure a shoe, in scale, the shoe is about 18 inches. 28mm converts roughly, and I do mean roughly, to 1/60th scale or 1/50th scale. I've even heard it expressed as 1/66th scale. So there's a little bit of variation, and that's because the miniatures are not sculpted to a stringent scale. There's a lot of fluffing. Most Games Workshop miniatures tend to be very chunky, very bulky, and that's to give them their look. They also feel right, and so the sculptors are sculpting to what feels right, not necessarily what is correct in scale. So I fudge a little bit when I'm building my buildings, as everyone else does, and scale is going to be, for me, 5mm to the foot, which makes 6-foot man 30mm tall, I believe. Yes, 30. Yes, Jeff can do math. Math hard in the morning for Jeff. So with that being said, these in our scale tend to be about 2 feet wide, which If you're making a very heavy duty structure, you can justify beams this thick in your structure. But these being typical Games Workshop chunky wizards, you can see that that's a heck of a beam. That is huge. Even for this ogre over here, which is an old school ogre, I understand. And so he's a little bit smaller. But that would be quite the beam for him to manage as well. So we need to start looking for materials that are more appropriately scaled, which is what I did for this project. And that brings us to the materials that I work with. I have worked with popsicle sticks. They still have their use. You can go to most craft stores and just literally buy a big honking box of these things for $5 or $6. They may be as high as $8. And they will last you for a good long time. But as I stated, these are too big, and your choices are to just work really big or sand them down and fill your house full of sawdust. Or you can do a little bit of research like what I did, and remember my scale is 5 millimeters to the foot. And so I went out and I found these little 5.5-inch long coffee stir sticks. And I went online and I bought boxes of 1,000 count. I think I got 8 or 9,000 boxes. Or, I'm sorry, 8 or 9,000 stir. If I ever order that many, save me. I ordered between 5 and 9,000 of these sticks, and it cost me with shipping and everything around $50, $55, somewhere in there. So this is a very inexpensive material to work in. It's better, in my opinion, than balsa wood, as I just cross camera here, because it's harder, it's sturdier, it holds up to being handled, transported. We all have had that building sitting on the edge of a game table. Someone goes to lean over to pick up some dice or move a miniature or for whatever reason and crush, unintentionally, but crush your building or break it or damage in some way. I find that working in these harder woods and using these framing techniques, which hopefully I'll be able to show off here in future videos, makes these buildings a lot more durable, and that is one of the big reasons that I work in it. Now, the people who work in foam do amazing things, and they have ways of protecting it. It's a cheaper material, probably inch per inch, than the wood. It's a lot easier to work in, and you can get a lot of wonderful effects. I just like working in this material. I also have found that you can get coffee stir sticks in other sizes as well. This is a craft stick from like a craft store. And then this is a stir stick from Starbucks. These are free, especially if you have friends who drink copious amounts of coffee. Have them go in, grab their coffee, grab you a couple of handfuls of these, and you will be set. Their main difference is these are the same style. Let me grab one of the other ones. That's how close these things are. One is 7 inches, one is 7.5 inches long. This one is 5 millimeters wide, which gives me my 1 foot beams. If I glue 4 of these together, I will get a 1 foot by 1 foot beam, which is ideal for working the big heavy beams in a Tudor style building. Now these are 4 point something millimeters wide, and they're actually even a little bit thinner than the Starbucks stirs. And be aware of that. I made the mistake of building this upper level on this building here with the bought slightly thinner stirs and not the Starbucks stirs, which I used on the lower part of this. And one of the things that I'm doing is I'm trying to make some very subtle stepping in the wood. And when I went to go try that here, I was confused why everything was level and even and smooth, and it was because these sticks are ever so slightly smaller. So when you source your wood from whatever place that you're going to get it from, be aware of what you're getting. Try to be mindful and consistent with what you're getting. You can also go down to, we have Hobby Lobbies, Michael's, and we even have a fabric store chain called Joann's here in the United States that carry craft materials, and you can get craft sticks of all kinds of sizes, shapes, forms. I've even got these little bitty ones right here. I was gifted these for Christmas because what do you get a crafter for Christmas? Materials, and they are grateful, trust me. Um, these are heavier beams in scale. These would be about 14 inches wide. They're about 6 inches thick in scale. They would make for really good heavy beam supports. I can thin it just slightly, and I'll be making staircases for the interior of this particular building just because I like being able to look through the windows of my buildings and see interiors, which is kind of the other reason I do things the way I do. I want to be able to have a story tell out inside these buildings, and that's the best way to do architectural storytelling without it getting in the way with the game that you're playing. So you can source these materials from a lot of different places. They are relatively inexpensive and easy to find. So what we're going to do, I've talked about wood. Let's go ahead and move forward and talk a little bit about tools. The right tools for the job is an adage that we have all heard, and it is something that applies to crafting as well as any other activities. To have the correct tools makes doing what you're going to do a lot easier. I'm going to go ahead and talk about some of the tools that I use in particular that are unique to working with these wooden structures, but I think I should also touch on some of the basics, crafting and painting 101. A lot of us take our tools for granted. We just assume everyone else has these tools. And for the most part, most of us will have these basic tools or something very similar. But for those of you who are new to crafting, who may be just researching, hey, what's this all about? Let me touch on a little crafting painting 101. The first and most important tool that you're going to need is some place that you can work in adequate comfort. Having a good chair is important. Having a good surface to work on is important. A lot of us work on the dining room table, which is perfect. And then we squirrel it away. Some of us are fortunate, like myself. I have a room that I can work in and store my materials and things. I have a big table set in this room that I can work on. So workspace is important. Make sure you're comfortable. Make sure there's good ventilation. Make sure that there's places to put the things that are not being worked on immediately but are within reach, like your glues and your files, your hobby knives, things like this. Just make sure everything is comfortably laid out for you. This will make your crafting a lot more enjoyable. The next thing I want to talk about is lighting. Lighting is very, very important. Now, I do most of my work in the daylight because I work nights. And so my off time is in the morning. So I'm fortunate that I have a big window over here. I also live in Arizona where the sun lives. You know, right now I've got it made because, you know, it's winter and it's almost 70 degrees here while the rest of the country's under like, you know, feet of snow and subarctic temperatures. Become the summer, you guys are going to be laughing at me because we hit regularly 120, 128 degrees. So it's a blessing and a curse, but I'm working in natural light, which is my point. Having natural light is really important for when you're painting in particular to get your colors to look right, to look natural, to blend properly. But on top of that, make sure you have really good lamps. I have two lamps here. Let me see if I can turn my little camera around here. It is not going to let me do it. Okay, so I'm going to turn the phone around by hand. And I have two old desk lamps that I use that shine down onto my work surface, which I am now going to talk about my work surface here. I have a big table that I have everything laid out on, but then I also have a paint station here. This one's it's an old school one by Games Workshop when they were making them out of MDF. I have a couple of these that I use. Then I have an old cutting board down here, which I use and I can use to extend my surfaces with. And then I have a good cutting mat. Now, whether you get a mat like this or a mat, this is actually a block of material that you can get like at a leather store that is used for cutting into whenever you're working with leather. Whether you get something like this, it doesn't really matter as long as, and boy, I'm sorry about all this horrible camera work, you have something that you can cover whatever surface you're working on and keep it from being destroyed. The closing, self-healing mats that have the grids on them, I like a lot because I can use them for quick measurements. They have different angles on them, and when I'm working with roofs and stuff like that, those help me, figure out and make sure all my angles are coming together and everything's coming together consistently. So that's touching on workspace and surfaces. Let's jump to the next little section and let's actually talk about some of our tools. So one of the advantages or disadvantages, depending on your point of view in working with wood, is in order to get heavy beams out of something like the stir stick, you have to laminate them together, which means we have to glue them and then clamp them consistently. One of the best tools that I work with that are inexpensive, really easy to get a hold of, are these binder clips, or I call them bull clips, but these are binder clips. And as you can see, they come in a variety of sizes. And what I do is I'll put the glue on the sticks and I'll put the sticks together and get them set the way I want. And then I will clip the binder clips onto the pieces as they dry. This helps them stay straight. This helps them get a good, clean, tight drying surface so that everything doesn't fall apart when I look at it sideways. These are very, very valuable. You would not have thought of something like this. And these you can get in office supply stores. We have a Staples, and we have other office supply chains, but just anywhere that sells, paper and pencils and pens and just office stuff, you should be able to find boxes of these for relatively inexpensive. I think they're like, $4 or $5 for a big old box, depending on the size, and I guess it will vary in your area. But these are invaluable in my mind. I don't think I could do what I do without these. These allow me to do a lot of production. I'll have a series of sawhorses, is what I call them, as things are drying, and then I can take them apart and put, in this case, this is just 2 sticks glued together. I can put 4, glue them, get a nice solid beam like this right here, or like this right here. Let's actually show it to you guys. And it allows me to get into production, which is, like I said, the drawback is most of my time is spent prepping wood and getting it ready to be used, cut, sawed, and whatnot. Another clamp that I tend to use, and I highly, highly recommend, these are DeWalt clamps. I don't know if they have a particular name, but these are great for whenever I want to clamp things to, let's say, this surface here to make sure everything's 90 degrees, or if I want to pinch 2 corners to make sure that everything's gluing square and tight. These are adjustable. These are about $5-6 each. I have way too few of them myself, so grab as many as you can. You need just 2 to get going and get started. And then you can add to your collection like I'm doing over time as you need. That is to me a very valuable tool. and very useful when we're working with woods. Another set of tools that I will use is I get it out here, a miter box. Now this is a plastic one by, it's called an Easy Miter Box by Midwest Products. I got this at, I believe, a Hobby Lobby, and it did not come with the miter saw, which is what this is. This is called a miter saw. This one actually came with the tools whenever you got the big Citadel Miniatures kit. This is a nice miter saw, but what I don't like about this one is that when these teeth start to wear and get dull, I can't replace it. I have to throw the whole thing away. So when looking for a miter saw, a craft miter saw, because you should be able to find these at the same place that you find the miter boxes, make sure you get one that has the ability for you to replace the blades, and make sure you can source extra blades. They don't wear out quickly. It will take you years of use to wear this out. But you want to be able to replace these blades when the time comes. This miter box comes with little holes in it, and it's designed to be able to stabilize unusually shaped materials by placing it in the box, putting these in a hole, and twisting them to tighten the material against one side or the other. The problem that I'm having with this particular miter box is, one, is made out of plastic, so I am slowly cutting into the material, and eventually I will probably end up cutting this poor thing in half. Two, these don't always hold the thin materials that I work with against this wall. So the binder clips come to the rescue. I just put whatever it is I'm going to cut in there. I go ahead and clip it to the sides nice and tight so that it doesn't move around while I'm cutting it with the miter saw. So this is a valuable tool that you don't necessarily get in your traditional modeling. That is unique to wood. Another tool that I use, and I'm not sure if other people use it in their traditional modeling or not, is something called a Mitre Snip. This too can also be got at a hobby store. I got this one again at Hobby Lobby. And what this allows you to do is set an angle, so 75 degrees, 45 degrees, whatever angle you want to cut at, and then you open them up and you put the material you want to cut in here, and then you clamp down and you'll cut at whatever angle you set it at. Now, the disadvantage to this tool is that this blade right here, which does all the work, is not sharp. It's not been sharpened. It's not intended to be sharpened. So it tends to crush the wood grain. So what you can do is, you can, if you don't mind cleaning it up, you can just clamp down and break off the end. And it gives you a relatively clean cut, but as you can see, there's some jaggies on there, so you would want to clean that up with sandpaper. When you're doing something like roof joists, it is really easy to sand your angles out of whack. So what I tend to do is clamp down. It puts a groove in there, and I move that groove up to the tip where there's more leverage, and just set it back into the groove, and voila, it cuts it. And it's a much cleaner cut. So there is a demonstration on how to use this, and this is a useful tool. Between the miter box and this, I feel a lot more confident in the angles that I'm cutting in my material. I will say that this doesn't do well with thicker pieces, especially the laminated pieces I do. It will cut it, but instead of a nice clean 90-degree cut, it'll tend to kind of start skewing and going at an angle, and that means I have to sand something, which defeats the point. So order of operation is important whenever you're working with these materials. If I wanted to use this exclusively, I would probably cut all the individual boards and pieces first, then I would laminate them together and then just clean them up. That's one way to do it, or I can just make them and use the miter box to cut everything. The other tool that I tend to use that is unusual for woodworking, although some of the people who work in foam will use these to great effect and for very similar effect that I'm using them for. Because I'm sanding, and I will touch on sanding here real quick. When I sand, I want to remove a lot of material. I'm going to use this 120. When I want a finer finish, I'm going to go to a 220 sandpaper, which I think these Emer boards, which I also use for getting in small places, are the equivalent of 220, maybe even finer, depending on the emery board and the maker. So when you sand everything nice and clean and smooth and square, you tend to lose the biggest advantage of working with the wood, which is the grain. Now, wood grain is made up of soft and hard material. And so what I use these wire brushes for is to prep the material again, to scrub back and forth. And what that does is that removes the softer material, leaving the harder material in the grain. This allows the grain to pop, and when I'm painting and using washes to bring out the wood, it really allows the wood to come alive. And of course, obviously, since it's wood, it's going to look natural, it's going to look good, and it's going to bring a lot of realism to your piece. So that's what I use these for. The next thing that I use, not as often on this project, but I did a lot on the barn project, and it's a luxury. I will absolutely be the first person to say this is a luxury item, and that is a Dremel. A Dremel tool is an amazing device with all kinds of attachments. In fact, I've got so many attachments that I don't even know what they do. I have to look them up and go, hey, is this useful for this project? Because I don't know everything. I got my Dremel as a gift, and all the attachments that came afterwards were also gifts. So people were just going, hey, he's got a Dremel, let's give him stuff. And I'm like, yay, what do I do with it? Anyway, I have used the Dremel, and I've had a Dremel since I was in high school. It is a very useful tool, and if you have the proper setup to use it, it'll make a lot of this go really, really fast. I probably should sit down and focus on better ways to make my building more efficient with it. But for now, I'm not going to mess with that. But it is a luxury. It's a fun thing to have. It does make quick work of sanding and whatnot. But for this little building, I'm not going to be using it. The only other thing that I use, which is for me a luxury, it's not something you have to have, but is a 3D printer. I am 3D printing my doors, my door frames, and I may 3D print my windows. Although I've already built them into this particular model, I may 3D print on future models the windows and window shutters. I may actually 3D print the stairs that I'm going to put in here as opposed to try to come out in the wood. And I've experimented with painting this material, which is a PLA. And with my particular technique, I can make it look like the weathered wood and match what I've got going on over here. So in very small doses and places, I'm going to go ahead and be making custom woods or custom doors and windows. I will probably make these SDL files available to the community, and as I test them and I find out the best way to create these, so that there is a resource, a free resource for people to download doors, door frames, get standard sizes going, and learn, if they're modelers, learn the way I make my models and maybe improve upon the process. So I'm going to be adding more and more of that into it over time. The last and probably the most important thing I use when working in wood is going to be my glue. I did not know starting off how important my choice of glue was going to be. We all went to school, at least here in the United States, and we all have used this school glue, Elmer's white glue, and I think the glue all is, I believe this is the same stuff. I'm not certain. I started off building my barn with this glue, and it's really good. It works and it's okay. It does exactly what you expect. But what I noticed is if I accidentally slopped the glue onto the wood, it made a non-porous surface that I couldn't sand away, even with the wire brushes. And when I went to use my painting techniques, which I do a lot of wash and what I call watercolor technique for staining and painting my woods, it left blobs and blotches, and it was horrible. And I didn't know what to do about it other than to try to become more neat, which you should strive for anyway. But then I went, well, I'm working with wood. Duh. Let's get wood glue, Jeff. And I did. This stuff has impressed me a lot. I'm using Elmer's. You don't have to use Elmer's. You just have to find a good wood glue that works for you that you can find in your area. I think this has wood pulp in it, and it dries stronger. In fact, it even claims to be stronger than the wood it binds to. It is sandable and paintable, which also I have learned means it's stainable, which means if I get a little bit of glue on my wood, it doesn't create those blotches that I was talking about. At least I haven't run across them in a significant way. I'm able to work with this glue. And so one of the things I've done to modify this, just to make it a little more easy, because I'm working really thin, small pieces of wood, is I went ahead and took the top off of one of these and put it onto this one. This way, when I'm gluing, I have a lot more control of where the glue is going to go. The problem is because this is a thicker, heavier glue, and then, like I said, I think there's wood pulp in it. You can kind of see the blobby blotchiness there. It dries faster, 1. 2, it dries faster. 3, it dries faster and will clog this nozzle in a heartbeat. I'm finding that I have to continually remember to close this nozzle while using it. Otherwise, while I'm messing with a piece down here, it's drying and clogging up in here. But if that does happen, just get yourself a piece of wire. I think this is actually a paper clip that I've straightened, and just stick it in there and open up the glue a little bit better, and just be mindful that this is going to clog on you, especially if you're doing a lot of production. One of the part of the processes, like I said, and I keep saying, is that I sit down and I build beams and beams and beams and beams. I have to create the materials I'm going to be working with, and that means I'm going to be using this a lot, which means that there's a lot of opportunity for it to clog, and it's just annoying, but it's not a showstopper. Just be mindful of it. So having talked about tools, having talked about glues, having talked very briefly about crafting 101, workspaces, work surfaces, yada, 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 I think that just about covers it. And with that being said, thank you very much for enduring this second video of my channel. Hopefully in future videos, we'll actually start working and showing what I do in my techniques, showing some of my design process, and hopefully down the road when we get a finished building, which I keep looking at it over there, it will be able to show off some painting techniques. Ooh, 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 ooh. And another material that I've discovered, this is just my personal quest for materials and whatnot, is good-looking roofing tiles. I'm going to go ahead and give you the secret to these. This is watercolor paper. It's the right thickness. It's easy to work with. Obviously, it takes paint because it's watercolor paper. It's got a tooth to it because it's designed to have the paints on them. And what I do is I create strips of these. I paint the strips in different colors. Then I cut the strips and then just randomly toss them into a container. I round the ends of mine. And that's why the barn's not done, because I have to have about, I calculated 3,500 more of these. And I'm literally taking a tool used for leather working for rounding the ends of belts off and cutting the ends of these shingles. And then I cut the shingles in half because I get 2 shingles per strip. And it's just a tedious process. But look at that. that looks good, and I'm very happy with that. So anyway, these are the kinds of roofs that we're going to be maybe putting onto this building over here, or I may model and 3D print some unique looking shingles. We'll see. No promises. But if you like what I'm babbling on about, because let's face it, I'm just going on and on and on. If you like what I'm talking about, if I'm entertaining, if the information was even remotely useful to you, please subscribe to the channel. Tell your friends about the channel and have them subscribed as well. So, my name is Jeff Perryman. This is the 28mm build, and I was once told that every successful YouTuber out there has a very unique and clever sign-off tag.